Adam Peters jumps to the Commanders today, and he was one of John Lynch's initial hires. They took him away from Denver. He's a Bay Area guy. I think the thinking here in the Bay was that he was going to be the guy who took over for John Lynch, and that John Lynch was not going to be a long-timer at general manager, and that Peters would be, the heir apparent. And I think, especially when Rand Carthon jumped to the Titans last year, I think the belief was that Rand jumped because John was here and Peters was the heir apparent. And now Peters jumps. Bob Myers was, really good in landing him. They both went to UCLA. Myers led the search. Once I saw Peters on the list, I knew that he was the primary, even though there were a couple other people listed as primary options as well. I think that was, kind of a fait accompli, that this was going to be Peters trying to resuscitate that Commanders brand. How big of a loss is this? Adam Schefter reported, this first, I believe, it's the first GM hiring. They hired him, to be their assistant general manager. John got that promotion with the title. They didn't necessarily change Peters' deal as far as his title. Are you surprised that Adam Peters jumped to the Commanders?
I'm not. I think this has been in the works over the last couple of years. A few off-season cycles ago, he interviewed with the New York Giants, and then last year he turned down a couple of interviews. And I think he's just been working his way to a general manager position where he can oversee and run a front office just by himself. And a lot of people watching right now are probably confused because John Lynch, as you said, Larry, did get that upgrade in title. And technically, they could have elevated Adam Peters to general manager of the San Francisco 49ers. And he has those NorCal ties. That would be a great story. But even though he would get an elevation in title, it's still Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch who are running the show, who oversee this roster. Now Adam Peters can go to a big brand, to an organization that has a proud history, with a new ownership group where you no longer have to deal with Dan Snyder. It's now led by the majority owner and Joshua Harris, who's done a pretty good job with his ownership in running the Philadelphia 76ers, as well as the New Jersey Devils. And I think all of the stars kind of aligned for Peters. He canvassed the market over the last couple of years, and he was waiting for a good opportunity. And with Washington, you get that. Major media market, big name brand. Now he gets to oversee the entire front office. He also gets to hire his head coach. And according to reports, he's going hard after Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who was sought after during last year's head coaching cycle, but he wanted to refine his play calling and his offensive vision and have another crack at it with Detroit this year. And it's worked out for him because Detroit had arguably its best season in franchise history. And now, after Ben Johnson was really able to increase his value last offseason, he did it even more. So if you're the Commanders, I think you're in a really good spot here. You have a good ownership group that isn't dysfunctional and doesn't have all the issues that they had with Dan Snyder, who's just an absolute stiff. And now you hire probably the most sought-after general manager candidate across the NFL in Adam Peters, who now might be able to bring in one of the more innovative offensive minds in the National Football League. And the Commanders, for the first time in a really, really long time, are in a good spot. They're also playing in a winnable division in the NFC East. There's been no repeat winner of that division since 2004. And when you play in that division, number 1 media market, New York, number 4 media market, Philadelphia, number 8 media market in Dallas, and you being in the nation's capital, you get a lot of primetime games too. So I think all of those are reasons for why Adam Peters left. And for him, that's a good job for him to get this job, because the Commanders interviewed Ian Cunningham, who's well-respected, assistant GM with Chicago, Glenn Cook, Alec Hallaby, who's been Howie Roseman's right-hand man for 16 years, and Will McClay, who's very well-respected inside that Cowboys front office as their assistant general manager.
Who's the heir apparent? Do you hire Tariq Ahmad? He's in his 3rd season as the Niners director of college scouting. He was the team's assistant director of college scouting, got promoted into the director of college scouting. He spent 5 seasons as an area scout, 1 as an assistant in the 49ers scouting department. He spent 4 seasons as the director of recruiting at Rutgers, 7 seasons overall there with Rutgers program. Got his master's degree in education administration. Obviously, a bright guy. Is he the heir apparent, or do you think they look outside?
Yeah, you could go Tariq Ahmad, director of college scouting. RJ Gillen is the director of pro personnel for San Francisco. And let me throw this out there if you want to go back to familiarity. Marty Mayhew's been the Commanders' general manager for the last 3 years. Peters might let him go. Do you bring back Marty Mayhew to be a member of this Niners front office? Knows the organization, good working relationship with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. And he had to deal with Dan Snyder over the last couple of years and Ron Rivera as their head coach. He had to inherit Ron Rivera as the head coach, and I think his best days are behind him. Old school defensive mind who went by the nickname Riverboat Ron, but was actually a pretty conservative head coach. I think you could go with any three of those options to replace Adam Peters. And look, this is the thing. When the Niners are as well-run of an organization as they are, and when they've had as much success as they've had in recent memory, 3 NFC championship games over the last 4 years and a number 1 seed this year, other teams are going to look at you as the model. Other teams are going to look at you to see who they can pluck so that they can get their organization back on track. And that's why Robert Saleh was poached to become the Jets head coach. That's why Mike McDaniel was hired by the Miami Dolphins as part of that Kyle Shanahan tree. That's why DeMeco Ryans, who is the first rookie head coach paired with a rookie quarterback to win a division in the history of the NFL, got taken by the Texans. And that's why countless executives have been taken away from this Niners front office to run football ops elsewhere. So yes, it's a loss for San Francisco, but fans should look at the Niners organization. They're in a really good spot. You'd rather have it be this way than them be so bad like they've been at moments since the turn of the century.
Yeah, this is the way it goes. I mean, you win, your guys get rewarded, promoted, and hired away. Now, are there any other defections you think on the horizon? The Bears are going to interview Klint Kubiak for their OC position. There's been a lot of rumor about Brian Griese. Yeah. The Niners could prevent Griese from leaving by simply naming him the offensive coordinator. Shanahan is the de facto offensive coordinator and the head coach. Will the Niners try to keep Kubiak or Griese by, just giving them that offensive coordinator title? Or do you think one or the other could go? And then there's Steve Wilks as well, who's been interviewing for, I'm sure he's going to get multiple interviews. There was reports about the Falcons. I would imagine Steve may get a couple interviews. Who's next to go? Will they retain their guys?
Yeah, the 49ers could technically block the interviews for a Brian Griese or some of their other assistants, but here's the issue that they run into is that Klint Kubiak, you could elevate him to offensive coordinator, but Kyle Shanahan is always going to be the play caller. They did that with Mike McDaniel. He was the pass game coordinator. He became OC back in 2021, but he left because Kyle Shanahan was always going to call the plays. So if Klint Kubiak has an opportunity to get back to being a play caller, and at the end of last year, once Nathaniel Hackett got fired, he actually did a pretty solid job of doing that with the Denver Broncos, and now he's a part of this Kyle Shanahan tree. The Shanahan, McVay, Matt LaFleur tree, it's long and windy in the NFL, and their fingerprints are all across the National Football League. Then I think you have to give that opportunity to Kubiak if he can become the full-time play caller with the Chicago Bears. I think the same can be said for Brian Griese. You can elevate him to OC, but he might want an opportunity to run an offense somewhere. And look at the job that he's done with Jimmy Garoppolo, who was playing really, really well last year before he got hurt. And then we see how poorly he played with the Las Vegas Raiders. That's a credit to Kyle Shanahan, Brian Griese, and this offensive staff. Look at how Trey Lance looked at moments, and then look at what Brock Purdy's been able to do now in a little more than a full season sample size. And in his first regular season as a full-time starter, he was number 1 in many quarterback categories. He broke the record for the most passing yards in a single season. And Brian Griese can be credited with that because he's the quarterback's coach. So he's another one who could leave to be a primary play caller somewhere and is now a part of the Kyle Shanahan tree. Brian Fluery is another one. He's the current Niners tight ends coach. Peter King wrote about him, about how he could draw some interest. And he has a pretty interesting path because tight ends coach who has a long and vast offensive background, but he's also been a defensive specialist, assistant coach for San Francisco. So that's a coach who has a very diverse skill set that teams could look at and really like. And then for Steve Wilks, with his play calling this year, and with the job that he's done with this defense, in-game adjustments, developing defensive backs, Diamador Lenore, Ambry Thomas, Charvarius Ward, who was just named an AP second-team All-Pro, and his experience level at the NFL level, and then with how much players respect him, he could be next. Atlanta Falcons interviewing an interview request, and the Los Angeles Chargers submitting an interview request. So again, this is what happens when you're a really good organization. Teams are going to try to take away from you because of how well run your organization is.
And Steve Wilks, if he does jump, because he's only been here 1 year, the Niners will not get that third-round compensatory selection. A lot of people are like, well, let him leave and take the third-round pick. The Niners won't get the third-round pick unless Steve stays one more year, and then they would. What do you think, though? If Wilks left, who's the defensive coordinator? Would they promote from within a Daniel Bullocks or somebody like that, or would they look on the outside?
At what point are we going to have the conversation that Chris Kocurek has earned the right to be a defensive coordinator in this league? He's the best defensive line coach in the NFL. He consistently maximizes and develops the hell seemingly out of every single defensive lineman that he's able to coach. And when you maximize players and you're able to get them back on track, like an Arden Key, a Charles Omenihu, this year a Cleveland Ferrell, who I thought fell under the radar but was a pretty impact player, your player development, your scheme, your style, it's become very, very impressive for Chris Kocurek. And when DeMeco Ryans went to the Houston Texans, he wanted to bring Kocurek with him as the potential DC. And if the Niners at some point don't elevate him to defensive coordinator, is he just going to go somewhere else? I understand that Kocurek is paid handsomely and he's gotten raises from the 49ers, and Kyle Shanahan really values him, and the Niners want him a part of this organization. But life is about upward mobility, and the average coordinator at the NFL level makes $1 million per year. And Chris Kocurek probably isn't in that neighborhood. I'm not sure what his salary is, but at some point he's going to want to challenge himself professionally, and he's going to want to prove that he can be a DC and a play caller in this league. So is that the name that you look at so that you can hold on to him and you can continue to develop a really key component of your football team in the defensive line?